Hello, my beautiful love bugs, and welcome back to my channel. If you are here because you are interested in learning even more about the complicated fig story, then hi, I'm so happy that you are here. If you're like, what is even going on? I suggest you watch the other two videos that I have done on this. The first was a react video where I reacted to someone finding worms, or actually wasp larvae, in her fig. The second was talking more about the fig system and how complicated it is with male and female figs and parasitoids of those parasitoids and ants that eat the parasitoids off the figs. Like, it's a whole thing. So you should watch those two first, because this video is going to build off of those and not make a lot of sense otherwise. I am so excited for the questions that you big-brained love bugs asked. No basic questions from y'all, not even one. All of your questions were so thoughtful and required me to deep dive into the literature, so congratulations to me, I guess. I know way more about figs than I ever thought I was going to from doing one little react video. So without further ado, let's get into your questions. The first question is by John, and he was asking if the pollinator of the fig that we mainly have in agriculture has also been introduced throughout the world. And the answer, pretty basically, is yes. So the common fig, which is the species that we use a lot in agriculture and the species that we normally eat, is found natively in Asia and the Mediterranean. It has now been introduced throughout the world and had been introduced into America in the 1800s. The problem was that when it was in California, people were like, y'all, we got this fig tree, but this fig tree ain't producing any figs. What's going on here? And what was happening is that they didn't have the pollinator. So in 1899, they introduced the pollinator to North America, and now we have delicious, delicious figs for all. That pollinator, because each fig tree has a specific pollinator, that pollinator's name is Blastophaga senes. I know, it just rolls right off the tongue. So that is the pollinator that was introduced to North America to pollinate the fig. That pollinator is native to Southern Europe and to the Mediterranean. Both the fig and the fig wasp are what we call naturalized in most of the areas where they're introduced. Invasive is a very specific ecological term, and not all non-native plants or animals become invasive. In this case, they have become naturalized, which means they are non-native but also not invasive. So the fig tree and its pollinator are both naturalized. John also asked the question if this obligate pollinator relationship has been known for a long time. And yeah, since at least the 1800s-ish, somewhere in there, especially when they realized that they needed the wasp to pollinate the figs. So, 100 years and some change. Sean asked if the wasps only revolve around this relationship. And that's a really interesting question. On the surface level, yes. These are what are called obligate pollinators. So each fig tree needs its own fig wasp. And the wasp cannot live without the fig tree, and the fig tree cannot live without the wasp. Ancestrally, we as in the scientific community, believe that the wasps actually were a parasite of figs. So we can see this a lot in gall-forming wasps, and we can see this in gall-forming flies, where they will inject some sort of chemical that basically gives the plant cancer. The plant makes a lot of extra plant tissue, and the little larva that's inside is eating that excessive growth. We think that's how this started, that these wasps would lay their eggs inside the fig or on whatever ancestor was the fig and basically parasitize it. And over millennia, millions and millions of years, we see this really interesting, complicated, obligate mutualism between the wasps and the figs, though we don't think that was how it started. Usernames are hard to pronounce, so I'm just gonna give you a little nickname here. Cray asked if you can find multiple fig wasps inside a single fig. The answer is probably, it depends. Y'all ask complicated questions, y'all get complicated, muddy answers. The fig releases a volatile, smelly compound that basically says, hey, I'm receptive to pollinators. I am at my peak performance. Come visit me, come pollinate me, and we will have a lovely life together. I'm assuming that's what the volatile chemicals are actually saying. It was assumed that the figs only release that signal for maybe a couple days, especially because many of the fig pollinators live maybe 48 hours, sometimes up to a week, but not very long. However, studies showed that if the fig is not pollinated, then the receptivity period and the time that the fig is sending out volatile chemicals can be increased to 2 to 3 weeks, which is a lot longer than the 2 days that we previously thought it was gonna be. Once the fig is pollinated, that volatile chemical is shut off and the fig is no longer receptive. There seems to be a little wiggle room in this and exactly when it shut off, and sometimes if there's only one pollinator or it didn't get pollinated like well enough or something, then it will keep that signal on. So you may find in some cases where there are multiple broods that have come from multiple mothers. How often does it happen? How common is it? I don't know. That's what I could find. You think these answers would be easier to find, but they're like surprisingly difficult to find. If you want a PhD, study fig relationships. Apparently. By the way, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for hanging in here with me while my upload schedule is a little bit random. My dad just left. We had an awesome time together, and I'm planning 3 group tours for 2022 here in Ecuador. My name is Nancy. I'm an entomologist. I live in Quito, Ecuador, where I take you around the jungle and show you all the amazing bugs. So keep paying attention on the channel and on my social medias, which are down on the reference section, to keep track of when those group tours are happening if you want to visit Ecuador. All right, more questions. Osama asked, if you eat figs later in the season, can you avoid getting a mouthful of worms? And of course, again, the answer is complicated. So first of all, let's learn about fig crops and how figs work. There are 2 main crops of figs. The first is what's called the breva crop, and that fig matures in spring and is maturing off of the previous year's growth. The second crop is the main crop and grows off of this year's shoots and matures in summer or fall, depending on where your little fruit fig trees are growing. Okay, you're gonna keep that in mind because that's gonna come up in one little second. There apparently are 3 main types of edible figs. The first fig type are the persistent, and these have female flowers and do not need a pollinator. Yeah, take that, pollinator, figs don't need you. It's pretty similar to something like a seedless watermelon or a seedless banana. So, as Biker Dave asked, yes, some figs don't have wasps, and my friend Peter, who is in agriculture, he's an agricultural entomologist, is going to explain this better.
Hey Nancy, it's me, your second most favorite agricultural entomologist. I just watched your fig wasp video and it was so good. You're absolutely right that figs have to be pollinated by a wasp in order to produce a viable seed. However, as an agricultural entomologist, I'll tell you that sometimes pollination isn't as important as it's cracked up to be. I'm calling you from inside of our cucumber high tunnel, and you can see on the edges of the high tunnel there's actually a mesh. That mesh is there to keep insect pests out, but it also keeps pollinators out. We're growing cucumbers in this tunnel, and I'm not worried. We've actually already pulled a couple of tons of cucumbers out of here. That's because the cucumbers that we're growing don't need to be pollinated in order to produce fruit. In fact, we don't want them to produce a fruit. Cucumber seeds are hard and tough. We don't want those when we're making a nice pickle or slicing cucumber. So, these cucumber varieties are what's called parthenocarpic, which means they produce a fruit even when they're not fertilized. This is where we get things like seedless watermelons, which do have a seed, it's just not fertilized, but we still get a nice big fruit. Now, as you mentioned in your video, figs aren't technically fruit. They're more like a flower that's been turned inside out, but for our purposes, we can call them parthenocarpic. There are some varieties of parthenocarpic fig. They're usually called persistent figs or common figs. And a lot of the varieties that you'll see for sale here in the United States, like brown turkey or mission figs, they're parthenocarpic. They'll produce a fruit even if they're not pollinated by a wasp. Some varieties will produce fruit when they're pollinated or when they're not pollinated. Fig seeds are really, really tiny, so it's going to be hard to tell if your fig was actually pollinated. So if you buy a fig in the store, you really don't know whether it may have a wasp in it or not. You generally won't be able to tell just by looking at it. So unless you know the variety of the fig that you're eating, you really have no way of knowing for sure whether it had a wasp in it or not. Either way, it's delicious and you should absolutely enjoy.
Thank you, Peter, for helping us. The second type is caducus, and caducus means that you need the pollinator. The fig needs to cross-pollinate with someone else, and it needs the pollinators to do that. This is the fig tree that I talked about in, I think, the first video, where if the fig is not pollinated, the fig fruit falls to the ground and the fig tree gets mad and drops it. There's no pollinators in here, no one pollinated me, or they didn't pollinate. Y'all, I'm getting rid of you. The third type is the intermediate. And remember the breba and the main crop stuff I was just talking about? Well, yeah, that's coming up again. So the intermediate figs, the breba crop, or the first crop of figs, do not need the pollinator. They're like, we're cool. We don't need the pollinator. We're just gonna live our best life. The second crop, the main crop, does need to be pollinated. That's why it's called the intermediate. It's kind of like a happy medium of mix of both types. So there we have it. So your question is, should I just eat figs later in the season to avoid crunchy wasp larvae? The question is, like, it's complicated. It depends on what kind of fig you're eating and when you're eating it. So probably most of the figs that you're going to get in the grocery store or in Fig Newtons are not the kind that would even need pollinators and even have wasp larvae in them. They're probably just the common fig, and they're probably just the persistent type, and you probably aren't even going to have any delicious wasp larvae or protein supplement. Alexa, you asked probably the hardest question on this list to answer. Congratulations. So you and I, we're just talking right now, face to face, through a screen. You may remember from my last video that the male and female fruits are different, but the male fruits, I said, dressed in drag. They smell like female flowers and they look like female flowers. That was like the really simplified version. So what's really happening is the fully female fruit has female flowers, but these female flowers have like a little flowery, tifty flower bit at the top, and then have a long thing called a style. So they're kind of like long stemmed flowers. I had to learn a lot of botany terminology for this. So that was fun. You're welcome. So it has this like long style, this long kind of like stem thing. And so when the female wasp enters the female fig fruit, she tries to lay her egg, but her ovipositor is little. It is too small to put an egg in that long stem thing. I'm just going to keep doing this a little bit more. That's how the female flowers can produce seeds, because the egg either can't be deposited or can't develop. And so the female fig flowers can just use the pollen and make seeds, and nothing is going to eat them. Convenient. The male fruit, this is where it gets complicated, is morphologically hermaphroditic, but functionally male. That's right. Here we are. So in the male fig fruit, you have male flowers, which are short, and you have pseudo-female flowers. They look and function just like female flowers would, except this stem, the style on them is short. That means the female can put her ovipositor into that little stem style thing, and her larva can grow up and eat the fruit that that female flower inside the male fig fruit is going to be producing. In some rare cases, that male fruit can produce seeds, which is funny. Yeah, they were right. I told you it's complicated. But when that happens, there's so few seeds, like maximum of 10 seeds, and some figs can produce up to 1,600 seeds per fig fruit. So we're looking at like a really small amount of seeds that sometimes happens when there's a fluke. But so basically what happens is that female wasp enters the male fruit, puts her ovipositor in the female flowers. Those female flowers use the pollen as they would, because they're technically female, produce the fruit, produce the seeds, and the wasps eat that. Then when they're about to leave, they do the standard thing. They leave the fig fruit, they collect the pollen from the male organs, from the male flowers, and leave. So there you have it. You have morphologically hermaphroditic male fruits that are functionally male, because they don't produce any seeds. They are not producing any new fig trees. They're just producing fig wasps. Aren't you glad you asked? And finally, Howman asks, if the ants are protecting the fig fruit, won't they accidentally kill the pollinators anyway? Like, how can they tell the difference? And that is a great question. So again, a quick recap. There is a fig. There are these little bugs called bugs that drink the sugary sap. They poop out pure sugar. Basically, the ants drink the pure sugar, tend them like cows, and protect the pasture by literally killing anything that comes too close. That can be parasitoids that are going to put their eggs inside the fig. That can be actually some seed borers and other what we call seed predators, or basically seed eaters, that the ants don't want around, because if you don't got the fig, then you don't have the bugs and you don't get your sweet, sweet honeydew. The answer is they do sometimes eat the pollinators. We're back to the mutualisms are messy and not very perfect, and it's amazing they work at all, really. When you have a seed predator or you have the parasitoids, they need to spend a decent amount of time on the outside, on the surface of the fig, either trying to bore a hole into the fig or finding the hole of the previous parasitoid, or just like munching their way through it if they want to eat the stuff inside. That gives the ants plenty of time to find them and then eat them off of the fig. The wasp doing all the pollination, it has its own little secret entrance. I'm not sure if you remember from the first video, but there's a little tiny hole at the bottom of the fig, and the fig pollinator goes into that little hole and enters, and that's how it does the pollination and lays its eggs and all that jazz. So the pollinator probably doesn't come in contact with the ants that often. When it does, though, because the wasp does have to sit on the outside and does have to find it, and they're not very good flyers. Like, these things are really, really tiny. Their wings are really, really tiny. They basically just drift around until they smell the volatile chemicals from about 5 meters away, or about 15 feet, and then actively fly towards the fig fruit to save energy because they're really tiny. So once they get to the fig fruit, they need to find the little hole, and they may end up on the surface of the fig while they're looking for that little hole. And if that happens and the ant happens to be there, the ant will probably eat it or yeet it regardless. And it happens. Does it affect the overall functionality of the mutualism? Apparently not, because you can find figs that are covered in ants that still have a mountain of fig wasps that leave it. So apparently, even though the ants may eat a few pollinators, it's not enough to be enough of a big deal to, crash the mutualism. Thank you all so much for your incredible questions. We're back up to a more regular upload schedule as my tours schedule stuff has kind of relaxed a little bit. Again, if you're interested in coming on a group tour, we have one with Stated Clearly coming up next year, and 2 macro photography workshops. If any of that sounds interesting to you, keep your ears peeled, keep your ears, keep your ears open. Whatever. Keep your ears open. Keep watching this channel. Keep following me on social media, because I will be announcing that as soon as we have dates and prices that should be within the next month or so. So very excited. If you want to learn all about the figs and how they work and all that stuff, and you want to watch the other 2 videos, you can check them out over here, or you can click down here and see more commentary videos. All right, my beautiful love bugs, I will see you all very soon, and it's so exciting to be back and researching and talking to you love bugs about bugs. All right, bye.